Hello. Hi guys, and welcome back to a new video. It's been a little while, but I am back with a brand new story from the 80s, so not that new. Today I'm going to talk about the Vicky Lyons accident, which is something I heard of through Forensic Files. It's an episode I watched years ago that I thought was so interesting, and it's kind of been on my mind ever since, so I decided I wanted to talk about this one today. I definitely misremembered quite a lot of things from this episode. I'm not sure. I mean, I've seen Forensic Files so many times. I'm a bit surprised that I didn't remember this correctly, but I watched it again and I've done my best to find as much information online as possible. This isn't an accident that has a lot of information online just because it didn't resolve in a death. It wasn't a murder or anything like that. It was just an accident. So I guess it didn't get the same type of attention that, a murder would get or something like that. So I did my best to find as much information as I could, and I've put it all together. Also, over the weekend, I just passed 100 subscribers, which is nothing really to me. It's a lot. I started this channel about a year ago, and then I kind of stopped for a couple of months, and now I'm back. And I mean, I'm sure people are subscribed for very different reasons. Like, I have some art on my channel, I have some true crime, I have some hamster content. One day I'll figure out what I want to do. For now, I'm just going to do everything I want to do and keep posting it. But thank you to all the people watching and people who subscribed. For whatever reason it is, it made my day. So thanks a lot. And without further ado, let's get started on this story. So for this case, I'm taking you all the way back to 1980 in West Texas in Big Spring, which is actually a very small town in the west of Texas. And Crystal Lyons, as well as her husband Bill, had a daughter named Vicky. And Crystal used to work for the Big Spring Herald, which is the newspaper for the town. One day, while Crystal was getting ready for work, she noticed that the babysitter never showed up to take care of Vicky. So she called her boss, who essentially told her, if you can't come into work, forget you have a job. So she decided to go into work and actually bring her daughter Vicky, who at the time was 4 years old. And she had done that before. It never really been an issue. She obviously tried her best not to do that as much as possible, but she didn't want to lose her job. So she brought Vicky along with her and decided she would do her best to work throughout the day and keep an eye on Vicky. Now, she describes Vicky as a very quiet child who never bothered anyone. She was quite happy to sit in her own corner and play with her toys, so it wasn't an issue. At some point in the morning, Reverend J.B. Hardman showed up to pick up a copy of the Herald, which had just been freshly printed, and kind of rushed away. And just around that time, the cars were all getting ready near the loading bay so that they could stock all the newspaper and send them out for delivery. Throughout all of this commotion, Crystal actually overheard her boss tell Vicky to go and play in the parking lot. Even though Vicky wasn't really making noise or a fuss, I don't think she was in the way, but for whatever reason, the boss just told Vicky to go play outside in the parking lot. And Crystal overheard that, and she liked none of it. She was just about to get up and tell her boss, you know what, I'm not comfortable with this at all. I'm just going to grab Vicky, go home, do what you need to do, essentially. If you need to fire me for this, then go ahead, fire me. But I'm not leaving my daughter to play in the parking lot. That wasn't part of the deal. But she never got to say that, because as she was coming up to her boss, she looked out in the parking lot and found Vicky unconscious. And she said that even from a distance, she could tell that Vicky had been hit. Because all of the cars had already left, there were no witnesses around. No one had seen anything, and she didn't know what was wrong with her. So she called an ambulance straight away, and the ambulance rushed Vicky to the hospital, which was an hour away. I mean, remember, Big Spring is actually a very small town, so the nearest hospital was about an hour away. And Crystal followed in her car, but to make things worse, the ambulance actually broke down on the way to the hospital, which is just adds a whole level of stress to everything. They did make it to the hospital eventually, and she was immediately admitted to the ICU. Now, Bill and Crystal were both finally allowed to see their daughter, Vicky, their only daughter and their only child. But as they came into the room where Vicky was lying, she started vomiting blood. So they barely got any time with her before they were rushed out of the room. But on the way out, Crystal actually noticed that the marks on Vicky's head were very unusual, and she pointed them out to her husband, Bill, and said, "Those look like tire marks." And he said, "Yes, they do." And she had, the most important part of this entire case just relies on Crystal's thought process, which was to immediately take pictures of them. And it makes me wonder, in 1980, I know we all have phones in our hands like every day nowadays, but I feel like 1980 everyone had a camera on them. For whatever reason, she had a camera on her and took pictures before leaving the room, which is the smartest thing she could have done. Now, back at the Big Spring Herald, while Vicky is being treated in the hospital, police interviewed everyone, but no one had seen anything. There were no witnesses, and obviously there was quite a lot going on at the time, so no one had seen anything, and very little could have happened. You know, this wasn't a place that had many strangers in it. It could only pretty much be the people who work for the Herald. But they immediately started looking for J.B. Hardman, the Reverend, who dropped by just as the cars were about to leave the loading dock, and kind of left in a rush. He left very quickly. He literally grabbed a copy of the newspaper, kind of peeled out of the driveway, peeled out of the parking lot, and police thought that that was suspicious enough to put out an APB and search for JB. Police found him in the next town over in Snyder, where he was peddling fish, which I had to look that up, basically means he was selling fish from the back of his truck and kind of going town to town. It wasn't a very official business, but that's how he made most of his living, because he wasn't making a lot being a reverend. So he was kind of doing that, and they arrested him in the next town over. Now, J.B. Hardman did explain that the reason he left in a rush is because his wife hadn't packed him a lunch. So he left for work, but on his way to work, decided to drop by a chicken place to pick up food for his lunch. And then on the way back, past the Big Spring Herald, saw all the cars about to leave, meaning that a copy had just been printed. And he thought, I'm just going to stop by, pick it up, and go on my way to work. And he was kind of in a rush, so that's why he left in a hurry. But he did stop there every day to pick up his newspaper. It just happened that day he was in a rush. So he, thought that was a good enough explanation. He said, no, nothing like that happened. I have no idea what happened to this Vicky girl, but that's why I was in a rush. I wasn't rushing away because I just ran over a girl. Unfortunately, that wasn't good enough for police. They arrested him on the spot for running Vicky over and leaving the scene of a crime. And while he was overnight in the cell, he overheard the police officers on the phone saying that they went over his truck with a fine-tooth comb and couldn't find anything aside from a tiny speck of blood. And he started stressing out because he had no notion of that. And he started thinking, maybe I did run this girl over and didn't realize. So he was in jail, arrested for something that he claimed he didn't do. But now he started doubting himself, thinking, what if I did do this and had no idea that I'd done this? Vicky spent about 3 weeks in a coma, and she had severe damage to her brain and also one of her eyes, but she did slowly recover. She still couldn't speak or walk, but over time, some of her symptoms improved, and Crystal actually brought her back to work because all of her colleagues were really concerned. They wanted to see Vicky. They wanted to know she was okay, so she drove back to work with Vicky in the back and kind of just let her colleagues just say hi, and just so that they could all see that she was doing great. However, when one of the employees came up to the car window to say hello to Vicky, she immediately started screaming, kicking, screeching. Up until then, she hadn't really spoken at all. She couldn't really talk, so that was the closest to noise she ever made. And that was upon seeing one of the colleagues, and only one of them. And to be honest, Crystal was not very satisfied with the police choice to arrest JB. She didn't think he was guilty at all. And she honestly just decided to start her own investigation because she wasn't happy with how police were treating things. She wasn't satisfied that JB was the one who had injured Vicky, and she wanted answers. So she started thinking to herself, what would police do? Aside from that, police, clearly they weren't interested in trying to solve this, but what would police do in general? And she decided to write down every single vehicle she had seen in that loading dock or in the parking lot just around that time. So she wrote everything down, and then she returned to that parking lot and grabbed black shoe shine, put it all over the tires and decided to make impressions. And she labeled everything very meticulously. So she knew exactly what vehicle, the time, the date, which tire, the position on the car model, who it belonged to. She took extensive notes about everything. And she thought that whoever had run over Vicky was responsible for the tire marks on her head, which had since disappeared. So that's why it was so essential for her to take pictures when she did, because the marks didn't stay there forever. Now, she went to police with the evidence and all the paperwork she got and all the tire impressions because she thought they weren't doing enough. And she said, you know what, I think one of these tires is responsible for the marks on my daughter's face and for the accident. And I'm just going to quote what she said to the police because even for 1980, I think it's kind of telling. And she said, "You've harassed a black man who was just a sweet, harmless old man who never done anything wrong to anybody." And she wanted them to make this situation right. She did not believe JB was responsible for this, and they didn't seem to care about who the real person was. So not only did they seemingly arrest an innocent man for no reason, they had nothing on him, they also didn't seem to make any effort to look for the actual perpetrator, I guess, whether it was an accident or not, or whether it was intentional or not. They didn't seem to care. And at that point, they essentially told her, you know what? This is no longer a criminal investigation. This is a civil matter. Basically told her to just move on. Now, just to make things clear, I forgot to mention that earlier, but the tiny speck of blood they found in JB's truck was essentially just fish blood. It wasn't Vicky's blood. It wasn't a human blood. It was just fish blood because he was selling fish from the back of his truck. So they definitely had nothing on him, and they kind of left it at that. They didn't indict him. He got released, and they didn't look for anyone else. And they claimed that, the parking lot for the newspaper was very bumpy and had a lot of potholes. They said, you know what, it's probably just an accident. No one realized they ran her over, and that's it. They weren't trying to find out who did it. Now, over the next 3 years, Crystal was taking care of Vicky, nursing her back to health, and she received zero help from anyone. No one was interested in trying to help her solve this case. She wanted justice for Vicky, and it seemed like nobody cared. And one day she was reading the newspaper when she read about this man who seemed to be the Sherlock Holmes of tires, essentially. This man's name was Peter Mcdonald, and he actually worked with the FBI. He did crime scenes, he did cases, he knew everything there was to know about tires. He actually was the chief designer of the Firestone Tire Company. He was since retired, but passionate about tires, clearly, and knew so much about them that he ended up teaching for the FBI and helping on cases where tires were involved. And Crystal wasted absolutely no time. She called him immediately and tried to explain the situation and what had happened to Vicky. And she told him, I have these pictures of what seems to be tire marks on her face, but I also have impressions from all the tires in the parking lot, that could link up to it. Do you think you could help me? And as bad as it sounds, he actually did have a lot of experience with tire marks on human flesh. So he was actually the perfect man for the job. And he said, absolutely, send me everything. Now, she did send the pictures, but unfortunately, there was no size reference or scale for the marks on Vicky's face. And although you might be able to recognize a pattern, just alone on its own, you might be able to look at a tire and then look at the picture on Vicky's face and think, oh, that's the exact same pattern. But what I didn't know, what most people don't know, is that tires come in up to 12 sizes. So he needed to know the exact dimensions to make sure that it wasn't just the pattern that matched, but actually the tire size that matched. And she wasn't quite sure what to do, but she ended up sending a picture of Vicky, even though it was 3 years later, so Vicky was 7 by that time, a picture of Vicky with a ruler next to her face. And what I didn't know, again, either, is that the distance between the eye sockets and the mouth actually pretty much remained the same between the ages of 4 and 7, which is another just wild coincidence that the timing was absolutely perfect. She found out about this man through the newspaper one day accidentally, and it was just in time that she could send a reference and it would still match the original picture she had sent in terms of distance and size. So it didn't take very long for Peter McDonald to actually compare all the impressions, he was very impressed with the amount of work she did and how meticulous she was about just labeling everything. I mean, everything was very clear, and all he had to do was just, his job was basically to compare everything. And it didn't take him long to single out a vehicle, which, believe it or not, was the vehicle that belonged to the colleague who had come up to her car to see Vicky, and Vicky started screaming and kicking. So it's like, you know, duh. But at the same time, how amazing is it that it definitely started to sound like they had the right guy. Now, they never did release the name of the person involved. To be honest, I don't think the person saw that coming. I don't think anyone was coming out of that parking lot thinking, you know, this little girl sitting right there, I'm gonna run her over. I definitely have no doubt believing it was an accident. Now, whether or not that person knew that they'd run Vicky over and just chose to just keep driving, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the parking lot was really so uneven that, you know, another bump in the road, they're like, you know, another day in this parking lot, and just left. Because why would there be a child in the parking lot? You know, that's my biggest fear, is like reversing and not seeing a dog or a child. That's like my biggest fear driving. So, but it's not something you always think of checking, especially in a parking lot in a newspaper. You know, this kid has no business being there, and she was only there because the boss sent her in the parking lot, which is the worst place to play. Like, I'm angry with the boss and pretty much no one else, because if the person did run her over and didn't notice it, then, you know, that I can't imagine living with that. But obviously Crystal wanted justice, and she wanted the newspaper to be held accountable. She wanted them to know that this was wrong. Now, because the accident damaged Vicky in terms of balance, eyesight, just mobility, so many things, Vicky ended up seeing so many surgeons. She needed so many surgeries to kind of go back to normal, back to where she was, and it was becoming very expensive. And Crystal did everything she could. You know, she wanted to nurse her back to full health, but obviously that was becoming very expensive. And also she just wanted accountability, and she ended up suing the newspaper, and they settled on a $750,000 compensation, which she took, but she also asked for one more thing on top of the money. Crystal wanted 15 minutes in the judge's chambers with the representative of the Herald with Vicky, and she wanted basically to talk to him, and she asked Vicky if she had anything to say, and Vicky just told him, "You destroyed my life." Unfortunately, Vicky does remember the accident. She remembers the boss telling her to go play in the parking lot, and she remembers that she was playing with these dishes, toys, you know, whatever maybe would come in a kitchen set. She was playing with these toys when the car reversed. And Vicky has also told interviewers that she gets stared at a lot, unfortunately, and she gets a lot of questions, you know, like, did you have a stroke? You know, what's wrong? What happened? What was the accident? She gets asked a lot if she has a mental disability, which she doesn't. And Vicky's a very sweet person. She did say that she didn't mind people asking questions, because at least, you know, she could explain, or that meant that they were curious and they wanted to know more. She did have a very hard time with people staring, maybe pointing their fingers at her or whispering, and, you know, and without knowing exactly what was wrong with her. Now, what is a bit crazy is that the colleague in question who ran Vicky over with his car had actually come up to Crystal to say that he didn't think he did it, but if he did, he's sorry. This was before the lawsuit even took place, and part of me thinks it's a bit fishy for him to come out and say, you know, well, look, I didn't do anything, but if I did, I'm sorry. I'm not saying that was the tone he had. So part of me thinks, oh, how fishy. He must know that he did something wrong. He must know deep down that he actually did run her over, and that he was the one to run her over. But at the same time, if I peeled out of that parking lot, reversed, you know, without being careful, but obviously I wouldn't be expecting a child to be sitting behind my wheels. If I were in that situation, and when I came back from my deliveries, I would find out that one of our cars ran a child over, I would actually probably be like, it was probably me, and I'm sorry. Not because I would think it's me. I don't know. I would immediately be terrified of being the driver responsible for that. And I would probably say the same thing. Like I don't, if it is me, I'm terribly sorry. And I don't think, nobody wins in this situation. I don't think this was a situation where the driver ran her over and knew what happened. I really hope not. Oh, Peter McDonald, the tire genius, is actually also an artist. In his spare time, he makes a lot of art, and a lot of it is inspired by the cases he works on, which is very common. A lot of artists, find inspiration in maybe their work or their day or experiences. And he did make a piece. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I mean, I'm pretty sure I feel uneasy about it, because he made a piece that was inspired by Vicky's accident. And because she didn't die as a result of this accident, I guess it's not as bad. But generally speaking, I mean, I don't know, you guys look at this and tell me what you think about this piece of art. Part of me really likes controversial art, but part of me kind of looks at this piece and think, I wonder if Vicky and Crystal saw this, because if they did, I don't think they'd be like, what, thank you for, drawing this, taking the time to make this into a permanent piece of art that we can't forget. I don't know. I have no idea. They didn't report on that. They didn't say whether or not they were aware that this man had made a piece of art. I don't really care for it, but he did do that, so that's one thing. The good news being that Crystal spent all the money from the settlement on trying to get Vicky healthy again, and she can walk and talk. She could pretty much live a regular life compared to how she was left, in a coma for 3 weeks, to now she can walk, she can talk. But by the time the settlement was over, Vicky's parents divorced, and Crystal actually returned to school. She went back to college in Denver to study forensic science. And I think that's kind of neat that she was so driven by this. I mean, she actually solved the whole thing. I mean, Peter McDonald obviously helped, but had she not taken those steps, that was really quick thinking, that was really smart of her, because otherwise they never would have gotten closure. They wouldn't have any accountability, and the money she got from the settlement helped get Vicky back on her feet. So in a way, obviously, Crystal is the one who solved this whole thing and also got an innocent man out of jail. Now, this case is a bit of a roller coaster, because obviously I did a little bit more digging to find out what had happened. This was back in the 80s, so I wanted to see if there was a bit of an update on Vicky and what was going on with her. Unfortunately, while looking up her name, I found her obituary, which means she has sadly passed away. Vicky Lyons passed away on June 9th, 2011 at the age of 34. And I think I want to read her obituary. I mean, you can find it online quite easily, but it does kind of sum up what happened to her after the accident as well. It does say that Vicky Lynn Lyons, age 34, of Charlotte, North Carolina, died on June 9th, 2011. She was born in Big Spring, Texas, daughter of William Harry Lyons and Crystal Bailey Lyons. Vicky was a professional women's wrestling diva for the past 6 working years for the High Spots Wrestling School of Charlotte, North Carolina. She was also a student at the Art Institute of Charlotte, where she was studying mass media. Vicky also enjoyed belly dancing and was an avid animal lover, owning both dogs and cats. She is survived by her parents, William and Crystal. And it's like not what I wanted to find out, I guess. To read that and find out that she kind of owned it. She really got back on track and she made the most out of life. She became a wrestler for a school. How cool is that? And I know she sounded like she was living a full life. For it to be taken away at the age of 34 is really probably the worst part of this entire story. It's not the accident, it's the fact that she didn't make it past 34, and both her parents both her parents outlived her. And on top of that, Peter McDonald, who helped solve the tire impressions, he also passed away 2 years later in 2013 at the age of 83. So he also outlived her. I mean, he was 83, which is a decent age, I guess, but she was only 34, which is very sad. But at the same time, she made the most out of it. It sounded like she was having quite a good time. She really enjoyed wrestling. She showed up every day for practice. It was pretty much her entire life. So I think sometimes you just need to focus on the positives, but I was a bit upset to find out that she passed away in 2011. Sometimes I hear, you look up people and you find out they passed away and you look at the date and you try to remember what you were doing that year or maybe that day. Not that I can remember that far, but yeah, I was in university at that time. It's just weird to think that that year I was doing something completely different, and yeah, I don't know what I'm going, I don't know where I'm going with this, but does that happen to anyone else? Do you ever just look at a date and be like, I wonder what I was doing that year or that month when that happened? If you're curious about what happened, she allegedly passed away from a brain aneurysm. I couldn't find any hard evidence to confirm that, but that, you know, it was completely unexpected and very sudden. I did find her Facebook page, which is still up and public for some reason, and I don't know why I want to share this, but let me just look that up. I found her page, I'll show it here, but basically you can see her last post in 2011, which is just, I don't know, 18th of April 2011, talking about the bad weather that had recently happened in North Carolina. And I was scrolling down, she shared a piece of her artwork, which is so nice. And then what I noticed specifically that just seemed so, I don't know, maybe sad, definitely sad, was the 31st of January, where she posted a picture of herself. I don't know if she was cosplaying, or I don't know if that was a wrestling outfit. It's definitely some sort of costume that she was kind of dressed up in. Looks pretty badass, to be honest, but yeah, she said 2011 will be a fierce year for Vicky Lyons. And also, I don't know, I think it's just because of where I work, and I just like, I just work in a funeral home, so I see that every day, but you know, no one thinks this is going to be their last year, and that definitely made me think for a second, you know, like I think everyone around New Year's time says, you know, next year is my year. And you might not realize that it could be your last year. I'm not trying to be depressing or anything. I'm really sorry, guys. But that one, for whatever reason, the fact that she had posted that on the 31st of January, I mean, who knows? Maybe she posted that every year. So, you know, it's not that deep, but I find it so sad that, you know, a few months later, a brain aneurysm took her away. But she definitely is inspirational. You know, she never harbored any resentment towards anyone. She seemed to really enjoy life. She had a lot of friends. She was a really kind person. She made the most out of things. She was a wrestler. Like, I don't think I could even do that. You know, like, I don't think I could ever. It's kind of like, what's it called? Roller derby. Is that what it's called? Like, I don't think those badass sports would terrify me. I don't think I have the balls to actually even sign up for them. But she did, and she really liked it, and she was really loved, and I feel bad for her parents as well, because that's just not the right way to do things. You know, that's not how things should go. You know, you shouldn't outlive your children. But to try and end this on a positive note, you know, Crystal Lyons did a fantastic job trying to solve this case. I mean, she was literally behind, you know, solving this case. It never would have gotten solved if they had relied on police. They were so quick to just dismiss the criminal aspects, whether or not the person responsible was aware that that had happened. You know, she still got justice, and she got accountability, and she managed to get funds so that she could nurse Vicky back to pretty much full health. And Vicky really took that opportunity to live life to the fullest, and I think that's a good lesson to just kind of take home with you. If you're watching this video, I'm sorry if this is a bit depressing, but I think it's important to just focus on the part that she really made the most out of things, and she didn't seem to be taking any day for granted. So hopefully you can leave with that message. Let me know if you like this case, even though it does have a very sad ending. Most of them obviously are true crime, never end well, but I know this one isn't the most uplifting. I'm really sorry. The forensics in this case alone is just wild, which is, you know, my favorite part of talking about true crime is the whole forensics and solving the case. To me, that's the best part. But yeah, I hope Vicky inspired you. You know, she didn't get to make it past 34, and maybe that's, you know, your reminder that, you know, do things you want to do and just don't take anything for granted. So hopefully you like this case, guys. Thanks again for 100 subscribers. Whether or not you watch true crime, I'm happy you're here. and I will hopefully see you next week. I've been very quiet lately, but I've been a bit busy procrastinating, so I'm back on track. I have the week off. I have a few videos lined up, so if you like this type of content, I have more coming for you, so please subscribe, stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.